I woke to the deep churn of engines and a tremor running through the walls. By mid-morning, the earth behind my cabin looked wounded, a fresh scar looping the hill like a boundary drawn by something unseen. Not forestry crews, not the county surveyors, the consortium, the same outfit that fined me for hanging laundry on a clear. They had sent bulldozers to prove a point. Gravel mounded against my steps. My fence splintered, my garden uprooted. They wanted compliance. They expected retreat. They didn't know the sensors under my eaves logged every vibration. Stay through the end, and you'll see how those recordings turned their excavation into evidence. And if you believe ordinary people still deserve peace on their own land, listen close. Let's begin. I moved here for the quiet hum between wind and pine. A stretch of gravel road leading nowhere special. Just far enough from town that night held its own kind of weight. I had steady habits. Dawn coffee by the woodpile. Evenings tending to the compost. A small square of marigolds that colored the porch like a sunrise frozen mid-bloom. The consortium owned the surrounding lots, warehouses, research sheds, but they'd always left me alone. Their notices came once a year. Polite reminders about property taxes, water rights, maintenance checks. Routine bureaucracy, easy to live beside. Then came the new director, a man in mirrored glasses and too much energy for silence. Promised efficiency in his first address. Promised compliance across all holdings. The tone shifted overnight. No more courtesy visits, just drone flyovers and coded memos nailed to posts. One morning I found a notice citing unregulated flora. Another claimed my solar panels. Interfered with signal testing. The letters came thick with legal phrasing and impossible deadlines. I followed what was fair, questioned what wasn't. Believing fairness still meant something. Neighbors in the valley whispered that the director didn't check everyone. His friends' barns stood untouched, their generators humming after curfew, their sheds spilling scrap into the creek. Mine became a model case study in defiance. So I started keeping records, timestamps, photographs, weather logs, not out of paranoia, but because silence makes truth easy to bury. After last winter's trespass, a stranger's boot prints. Circling my generator, I installed small, hidden mics beneath the porch and by the gate. Just insurance, I told myself. Nothing more. What I didn't expect was how quickly the tone would turn feral. First came the survey tape, bright orange, slashing through grass that had never been contested. Then chalk lines running under my clothesline like veins leading nowhere. The next week, metal rods appeared, sharpened, deliberate, spaced like teeth. The memos grew colder. The words non-compliance and disciplinary excavation started appearing in bold. I kept breathing, kept logging, convinced that reason would have to prevail once someone, somewhere, looked at the facts. The week before the digging began, I noticed floodlights wired to their trucks, beams slicing the night. My sensors picked up the vibrations first, low, measured, mechanical. When I stepped outside, the hill was moving. Soil rolling down in sheets, roots hanging like torn veins. They said it was boundary maintenance, but the trench followed no property line. It traced fear, not geometry. I stood on my porch, camera light steady against the dark, watching men in orange vests drive the line deeper, closer. By dawn, the edge of the trench kissed my foundation. The generator hummed, confused by the shifting earth. I filmed it all, their trucks, their laughter. The collapse of my fence into the ditch. A drone hovered overhead, red lights blinking like eyes half closed in guilt. They thought I'd be too stunned to react. But everything was recording. Audio, timestamps, faces, license plates. When I sent the footage to the oversight board, silence answered for 3 days. Then the digging stopped. The machines vanished, leaving only mud and a broken path circling my home. They never came back to fill it. I planted wildflowers along the rim, seeds of witness more than decoration. The wind carries their petals now, scattering them over the scar they tried to draw around me. The first morning I caught the vibration before the noise. A low thrum threaded through the floorboards, steady as a heartbeat too close to my ear. When I stepped outside, a flatbed truck idled at the edge of the gravel lane, its crane arm poised above a stack of steel panels. Workers in gray jackets stood around a clipboard, eyes flicking between the sketches, and my cabin door as if deciding who would speak first. The fence went down in neat sections, each panel lifted and set aside with mechanical precision. No notice posted, no county seal, just fresh markers gleaming where my property began. The truck's engine coughed smoke into the air. Gravel piled against my steps, and the message became clear. This wasn't improvement, it was intrusion. By mid-morning, an email pinged into my inbox citing boundary corrections due to zoning. Recalibration. The phrasing was bureaucratic, enough to sound harmless, but my gut recognized it as threat disguised as policy. Boundary corrections around my porch. I walked the new line slowly, recording with my phone. The panels cut straight through my small orchard, severing the drip lines I'd buried myself. The new posts leaned within inches of the old well cover, close enough to rattle whenever the pump kicked on. A proper crew would have waited for inspection tags. These hadn't. That evening, I sifted through the motion logs from the gate camera. The timestamp showed two figures in company jackets wandering onto my property well past midnight. One carried a can of reflective paint, the other a folded blueprint that glowed white in the light. They paused at the gate, pointed toward the cabin, and traced a rough rectangle in the air before laughing and walking off. Another feed caught the project manager at dawn, giving hand signals to his crew. Wide sweep, then narrow, drawing an invisible box too close to my steps. It wasn't maintenance. It wasn't any kind of survey. It was a claim. I called the county assessor's office first, explained the fence, the footage, the missing permit numbers. The clerk's tone shifted from bored to alert before promising a review. Then I called the sheriff's non-emergency line, not expecting sirens. Only a record, a line in an official log that said, "Someone noticed." Someone cared enough to write it down. Early action can change the ending. I drafted a letter to the consortium that morning, demanding an immediate halt to the fencing until permits and boundaries were verified. Their reply arrived hours later, an automated warning about unauthorized, obstruction of authorized development, followed by a threat of daily penalties. The next sunrise brought the crew back, harder-faced, their movements clipped and hostile. One worker caught my lens and smirked, raising a hand as if to block it. A neighbor twisted her ankle on the slope where they'd left a half-dug post hole. I logged the incident and added it to the record. The smell of heated metal and diesel clung to the air, turning my quiet clearing into a construction zone I never consented to. I gathered everything, the notices, timestamps, county codes about private boundaries, the consortium's own policy manual on access. I overlaid their recalibration zone on public maps and watched how neatly the new fence curved inside my lot. Trespass wasn't an opinion, it was coordinates. Stakes in soil that didn't belong to them. My attorney reviewed the images, her pause long enough to count as agreement. A cease and desist went out that afternoon, complete with still frames showing logos, license plates, and the manager's face mid-order. The county inspector called soon after, asking pointed questions that told me he'd already found irregularities in their permits. By evening, the consortium scheduled an expedited resolution session, timed squarely, in the middle of my workday, as if inconvenience could substitute for authority. I hadn't been invited to speak, only to witness my own verdict. I was exhausted but focused. The barrier they built around my cabin was meant to shrink me down, to trap me under paperwork and noise. Instead, it became a spotlight I could aim back at them. I packed my old laptop, a pocket projector, and one simple phrase to repeat until someone in that sterile conference room finally heard it. This is my boundary, and there are laws. On the day of the session, I arrived early, carrying a folder thick with evidence. The conference hall buzzed with low conversation. Contractors, residents, a line of officials behind a table stacked with binders. The fence had turned personal grudges into public scrutiny. What happened next would decide whether authority could weaponize property, or whether proof, cold, digital, undeniable, could turn exposure into justice. The director began with policy and poise, reciting regulations like scripture. I waited for the moment that would split the air. It arrived softly, the hum of the projector, the rustle of a cable on carpet, the hush as the first frame took the wall. Night appeared, blue-tinged and grainy. The gate camera caught two company officials stepping over the marked posts, flashlights glancing off steel. One carried a folded survey map. The other raised a can of reflective paint. They stopped where the new fence would later run, tracing a rectangle in the air, deliberate, ceremonial. like fencing off a claim on land already lived in. The room stilled. Silence, the kind that recognizes guilt before words confirm it. Another clip played, the dawn briefing. The project manager, the same one from the earlier footage, gestured toward my porch, fingers narrowing to indicate closer. The crew nodded. Machinery idle behind them. No safety signs, no permits, no inspection tags, just confidence sharpened into carelessness. From the back of the room, the county inspector stepped forward. Clipboard steady, voice measured. He began listing what had been skipped. Soil tests, setback verification, the mandatory 811 clearance before post-driving. Photographs followed, bent irrigation lines, concrete fractured near the wellhead, steel posts planted inside my lot by exact inches. Regulations turned from abstractions into evidence. The consortium's counsel shuffled papers, their binders thinning into a small, apologetic heap. Every explanation they offered collapsed under the footage still. Looping above us, the same midnight laughter, the same gestures tracing borders in the dark. My documentation filled the next sequence, the letters I'd sent, the unanswered warnings, the cease and desist, the inspection request that went ignored. My attorney summarized the violations, the property damage, and the rights at stake when authority crosses from oversight into occupation. The inspector signed a stop work order on the spot. His signature sounded final even before the pen left paper. The director tried to pivot, to cite minor compliance discrepancies, to question timestamps, but the room wasn't listening. The faces around the table had shifted from defensiveness to disbelief. The footage played again, and again the same image froze the room. Hands drawing invisible walls where none belonged. Power changed hands without ceremony. The fence had been meant as pressure. Now it was proof. I watched them realize what it looked like when control lost its disguise. The order held. The machines left. The ground around my cabin remained open, a scar waiting for closure. A week later, the county issued citations for unpermitted construction and for failing to notify adjoining landowners. The survey team and contractors faced citations that made their sudden cooperation almost reverent. The consortium's counsel, once curt and unbothered, called within days. Voice softened to negotiation. My attorney replied with terms: restore the property, compensate for damages, return all fees, and sign a binding agreement for oversight reforms. Under county supervision, crews arrived to undo what they'd carved. Steel came out. Soil filled the scar where the fence had cut. My irrigation lines were reconnected. The orchard retied, the well platform reinforced. A horticulturist treated the damaged roots, coaxing the trees back from shock. The consortium paid for it all: repairs, costs, attorney hours, and a settlement for the intimidation itself. None of it returned the nights I walked a perimeter that wasn't mine, but it confirmed something solid and enduring. Truth, documented, doesn't have to shout. At the next town election, people who had seen the footage and passed the warning tape voted differently. New representatives campaigned on sunlight and accountability. The bylaws changed. Permits now had to be posted publicly for any construction. All private development required third-party review, and appeal windows were extended to protect homeowners. The reforms turned enforcement into dialogue. The director who started it all lost his position but kept his home, which seemed fair. Justice without spectacle. Accountability without exile. I kept the censors not as sentinels but as witnesses. I kept the files, dates, signatures, clips as reminders that patience and precision aren't forms of surrender. I kept the memory of that. Broken line as proof that ground can be used as pressure or as testimony, depending on who holds the shovel. The noise faded, the grass grew back, but the silence afterward carried weight, the kind that warns and teaches and steadies. Maybe you felt it too. The slow squeeze of small authority, the polite letter that becomes a threat, the rule recited like a blade. If someone draws a border through your peace, how will you draw yours? Record it. Learn the language of your rights. Speak before the ground shifts. And if an institution decides your space is negotiable, remember this: daylight exposes more than any fence can hide. When the earth trembles under someone else's design, what will you do before the line closes around you?